Tom lived in a small town at the edge of the hills. His house was not big, but it was peaceful. Behind his property stood an old stone dam, built many years before he bought the land. The dam created a wide pond that glistened in the morning sun. Tom loved the pond because it was calm and quiet. Ducks often landed on the water, fish swam beneath the surface, and tall trees lined the edges, making it look like something from a painting. For Tom, this pond was not just water. It was part of his life, part of his peace. Every morning, Tom followed the same routine. He woke up early, made himself a cup of coffee, and walked out to his porch to enjoy the fresh air. The pond reflected the soft orange of sunrise, and the sound of birds filled the air. He often sat quietly, watching ripples spread across the water whenever the wind blew. Life was simple, and that was how he liked it. One morning, however, that peace was disturbed. When Tom walked to his mailbox at the end of the driveway, he noticed a thick white envelope with bold letters on it. The envelope carried the mark of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association, or HOA. He tore it open, expecting something small like a notice about lawn care or reminders about trash pickup. Instead, he found words that left him speechless. The letter claimed he was being fined for owning too much water. Tom read the sentence again and again, thinking perhaps he had misunderstood. But the words were clear. According to the HOA, his pond was too large and unfair to the rest of the community. They claimed he was hoarding resources and that the water could be better used for others. The fine was large, more than Tom had ever expected. He stood by the mailbox, holding the letter, his mind racing. How could anyone say he owned too much water? The pond had been there long before he moved in. The dam was on his property. The water came from the hills and streams that had always flowed this way. It was not something he created, nor something he controlled. Yet, here was a fine, demanding money for something that was part of his land and part of nature itself. Tom folded the letter and put it in his pocket. His calm morning had turned sour. He walked back to his porch and sat down, staring at the pond. The water still looked beautiful, but now it carried a shadow of trouble. He wondered who had started this claim and why the HOA would even approve such an idea. He did not have to wonder long, because he already knew who it must be. Across the street lived Martha, the president of the HOA. Martha was a woman who loved control. She kept her lawn trimmed like a golf course, her flowers lined up in perfect rows, and her decorations changed with every season. To Martha, everything in the neighborhood had to look and feel her way. If someone painted their fence the wrong shade or left their garbage can out too long, she noticed. She was always the first to send letters of warning. Tom had seen her do it to others. Now it was his turn. Later that afternoon, Tom walked across the road to speak with her. Martha was in her driveway, setting up tables and decorations. She was planning her annual garden party, the event she used to show off her yard and her influence. She wore a wide smile when greeting other neighbors, but when she saw Tom, her smile thinned. "Martha," Tom began, holding the letter in his hand, "I received this notice today. It says I am being fined for owning too much water. Could you explain this to me?" Martha placed her hands on her hips and tilted her head slightly. "It's simple, Tom. Your pond is too big. While your grass is green and healthy, mine struggles in the summer heat. Do you know why? Because you are keeping all that water. You are selfishly holding it on your land while the rest of us get dry lawns." Tom blinked. He could not believe what he was hearing. "The pond has been here long before me. It's fed by the stream in the hills. It's part of the land. I am not stealing water from anyone. But Martha only shrugged. The rules are rules. The HOA board voted, and we decided you should pay the fine. If you do not, there will be consequences. Her words were sharp, but her smile returned as she turned back to her decorations. Clearly, she felt she had already won. Tom stood there for a moment, gripping the letter tightly in his hand, then walked back to his house. That evening, he sat on his porch again, watching the sun set over the pond. He thought about Martha's words and the unfairness of it all. The pond shimmered in the golden light, peaceful and still, but Tom's thoughts were far from calm. He had no intention of paying for something that had always belonged to the land itself. For the first time, Tom realized his quiet life was about to become a fight. The following week, Tom prepared himself for the monthly HOA meeting. He knew the letter about his pond would be discussed there. He did not want to go, but he also knew staying silent would only make things worse. He ironed his shirt, tucked the letter into his pocket, and walked down the road to the small community hall where the meetings were always held. The hall was already full when he entered. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, some chatting, others sipping coffee. At the front of the room stood Martha, in a neat blue dress, holding a clipboard. She smiled at the crowd, greeting everyone with cheerful words, but her eyes narrowed when they landed on Tom. Tom found a seat near the middle. He noticed some neighbors nod politely at him, while others avoided his gaze. Susan, who lived a few houses away, leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm, Tom. She has been talking about you all week." Her words gave him little comfort, but he was grateful someone cared. The meeting began with routine topics. Martha spoke about lawn care rules, reminded people about garbage collection, and praised the upcoming garden party. Everyone clapped politely. Then she cleared her throat and turned the page on her clipboard. "Next item," she announced loudly, "the issue of water hoarding. One of our members, Tom, has been keeping more than his fair share of water on his land. This has caused others to suffer with dry yards. The HOA board has decided he must pay a fine, effective immediately." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some neighbors looked surprised, while others nodded in agreement with Martha. Tom stood, holding the letter in his hand. His voice was calm, but steady. "My pond has been here for decades," he said. "The dam is old, built long before I moved in. The water comes from the stream in the hills. I am not hoarding anything. It is part of the land." Martha interrupted quickly. "That is not the point. Your pond is large, and while you enjoy it, others struggle. The HOA exists to keep fairness. You cannot take so much while others have so little." Tom's eyes narrowed. "You say fairness, but what you want is control. The pond is not something I created. It has always been there. Are you going to fine me for having too many trees next? Or for having too much sunlight?" Some neighbors chuckled softly, but Martha's face tightened. "This is no joke. If everyone kept water for themselves, where would the community be?" Tom looked around the room. He saw faces filled with uncertainty. Some wanted to support him, but they were afraid of Martha. Others simply wanted to avoid conflict. Only Susan gave him a small nod of encouragement. He raised the letter in his hand. "This fine is unfair. You cannot punish someone for what belongs naturally to their land. I will not pay for something I did not take." The room grew quiet. Martha pressed her lips together, then forced a smile. "If you refuse, the HOA will take action. Rules are rules, and those who break them must face consequences." You may think you are above us, Tom, but you are not. Tom sat down slowly, his heart steady. He knew Martha was not used to being challenged. Most people in the neighborhood gave in to her demands because they wanted peace. But Tom was different. He had built his life on hard work and honesty, not on fear. The rest of the meeting dragged on, but Tom hardly heard it. His mind was busy, running through what might come next. He knew Martha would not let this go. She had set her sights on him, and she wanted to make an example of him. When the meeting ended, Tom walked out into the cool night air. The stars shone brightly above the rooftops. He felt a tap on his shoulder. Susan stood there, her eyes full of worry. "You were brave in there," she said. "But be careful. Martha is angry. She doesn't like losing. She will find another way to get back at you." Tom gave her a small smile. "Thank you, Susan. I will be fine. I cannot let her push me around." On the way home, he passed Martha's yard. Lights glowed in her garden, and he could see her moving about, preparing for her big party. He could almost hear her voice bragging about how she would embarrass him in front of everyone. The thought made him clench his jaw. Back at his house, Tom walked down to the dam. The moonlight reflected on the pond, calm and silver. He placed his hand on the old iron lever, feeling its cold weight. He had never used it before. The lever could release the water, sending it down through the dry ditch that ran past the neighborhood. He stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet night. He was not planning anything yet, but the thought stayed in his mind. If Martha wanted to fight over water, she might learn what real water could do. Tom finally turned back to his house. He sat on his porch and stared at the pond until the night grew darker. He did not know what Martha's next move would be, but he was ready. The days after the meeting felt uneasy for Tom. Every time he stepped outside, he sensed eyes on him. Some neighbors waved politely, but others avoided him. He knew why. Martha had influence. She spoke with authority, and people listened because they feared becoming her next target. Each morning, Tom checked his mailbox. More letters arrived, each one harsher than the last. The fines grew larger, the warnings bolder. One letter even said his property could face a lien if he did not pay. Tom read them calmly, then placed them in a drawer in his kitchen. He refused to be shaken. His pond was part of the land, not a luxury to be taxed. One afternoon, as he trimmed the weeds near his fence, he noticed Martha's car parked across the street. She was speaking loudly to another neighbor, pointing toward his house as she waved her hands. The neighbor nodded nervously, clearly unwilling to disagree with her. Tom went back to his work, though inside he felt the heat of her anger. Martha was building a case, not just against his water, but against him as a person. That evening, as the sun began to set, Tom walked down to the dam. The old stones were cool under his hands, the iron lever resting firm in its place. He crouched and listened to the steady sound of trickling water. The dam had stood for decades, holding strong against storms and floods. It was part of the land's history. Now, strangely, it felt like part of his own defense. He was still there when he heard footsteps on the gravel road behind him. Turning, he saw Susan approaching. She carried a small basket of apples, but her expression was tense. "Tom," she said softly, "I thought I should warn you. Martha is planning something during her garden party this weekend." Tom straightened. "What is she planning?" Susan hesitated, glancing back as if worried someone might be listening. She told a group of people that she's going to embarrass you in front of everyone. She says she'll prove you're selfish and make the whole neighborhood laugh at you. I don't know how, but she sounded certain. Tom looked toward the pond, the surface turning gold in the last rays of sunlight. He thought about Martha's words at the meeting, her threats in the letters, and now this warning. It was clear she would not stop until she got what she wanted. "Thank you for telling me, Susan," he said. "It helps to know what I'm up against." Susan placed the basket in his hands. "You don't deserve this, Tom. Everyone knows your pond has always been here. But people are scared of Martha. They don't want her anger pointed at them." Tom gave her a small smile. "Fear only has power if you let it. She can't take away what belongs to the land." After she left, Tom sat on the edge of the dam, thinking deeply. He pictured Martha's party tent set up, food displayed, guests laughing and praising her. He imagined her making a scene, pointing to him, shaming him in front of everyone. He clenched his fist. His eyes drifted back to the lever. For years it had been nothing more than a piece of iron, part of an old system he never needed to touch. But now, the idea of using it stirred in his mind. If the water were released, it would flow down the dry ditch that cut through the neighborhood. Martha's perfect garden happened to sit right at the lowest point of that path. Tom did not plan anything yet, but he allowed himself to imagine it. He pictured the water washing through her fancy decorations, soaking the neat lawn she loved so much, and turning her carefully arranged tables into floating messes. The thought made him chuckle quietly, though only for a moment. When night came, he walked back to his house. On the porch, he looked once more at the pond. Its calm surface reflected the moon, as if nothing in the world could disturb it. But Tom knew trouble was coming. The next morning, Martha sent another letter. This one was even more aggressive. She wrote that if Tom refused to pay, the HOA would use legal force. She ended the note with a sharp line, "You will regret standing against us." Tom placed the letter in the same drawer as the others. He refused to be intimidated. He spent the day repairing his wooden gate, mending a few boards near the dam, and making sure everything on his property was in good order. If Martha planned to attack him during her party, he wanted no weakness to be found on his side. As evening fell, Tom once again found himself near the dam. He touched the lever lightly, testing its weight. The metal was heavy, but it shifted under his grip. He felt the strength of the water waiting behind it, patient yet powerful. For the first time, he began to see the dam not just as part of the land but as part of his defense. If Martha wanted to use water against him, perhaps water itself would answer her. With that thought, Tom returned home. He sat on the porch as darkness settled, the frogs croaking near the pond. The quiet night felt peaceful, but beneath it lay the tension of what was to come. He knew Martha's party would not be just another social event. It would be the stage for a confrontation, one that might change everything. The morning of Martha's garden party arrived bright and sunny. Her backyard was transformed into a colorful scene of celebration. White tents were stretched across the lawn, tables were draped with crisp linens, and flower arrangements lined the walkways. Martha moved gracefully between her guests, offering drinks and smiles, making sure everyone admired her perfectly trimmed yard. Tom watched from his porch across the street. He could see the preparations through the trees and from the small rise near his pond. Music played softly from speakers, and laughter drifted on the warm morning air. Martha's voice rang out above the chatter, welcoming everyone and praising the decorations. Tom shook his head slightly. She wanted everyone to see her in control, and this party was her stage. Guests began to arrive, greeting Martha with enthusiasm. They were dressed in bright clothes, carrying small gifts or trays of food. Some glanced toward Tom's property as they passed, whispering softly, clearly curious about the pond that had caused so much controversy. Inside Martha's tent, she began a tour for her guests. She spoke of the plants she had grown herself, the flowers she had imported, and the ways she had improved the neighborhood with her guidance. Her smile was wide, but Tom could see her eyes searching for him, making sure he was watching from across the road. From his porch, Tom observed quietly. He did not move closer. He knew that approaching would only escalate things. Instead, he let the calm of the pond guide his thoughts. Its water shimmered, reflecting the sky, the trees, and the distant movement of Martha's party. As the morning progressed, he saw her gather guests for a toast. Glasses were filled with sparkling juice, and laughter grew louder. Martha raised her glass, smiling broadly. To friends and neighbors, she said, "May our community always be fair and beautiful." Her gaze flicked toward Tom, as if daring him to respond. He remained seated, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He did not cheer, nor did he frown. He simply watched. Susan arrived quietly, slipping past the decorations to stand near Tom's porch. She whispered, "Be careful. Everyone is watching. Martha is trying to show everyone that she has power over you." Tom nodded. "I know, Susan. I won't let her. But I also won't do anything rash. I will wait." The party continued. Children ran between the tables, their laughter mixing with the music. The smell of food drifted toward the road, tempting Tom slightly, but he stayed put. He could see Martha now directing a small group to look toward his house, pointing and whispering to make sure everyone knew the target of her complaints. It was clear to Tom that this event was more than a party. It was a demonstration of control, a way to intimidate him in front of the neighborhood. He stayed calm, observing the flow of people, noting where the tables were, the location of the tents, and the slight slope that led from his property toward the lower end of her yard. He walked down toward the dam again, the iron lever feeling familiar under his hand. He had touched it before, tested its weight, but had not released the water. Now, he considered the path it would take, imagining how it would travel down the ditch and across the ground. It was not meant as a punishment, but as a natural reminder. Water followed its path, just as it had for decades. Martha raised her voice again, calling for attention. "Now, let's all enjoy the garden and share our happiness. And let's remember that fairness is what keeps our neighborhood strong." Some guests nodded in agreement, but many looked uncomfortable. The topic of the pond had clearly divided the crowd. Whispers filled the air. Some admired Martha, while others wondered quietly if her control was too strict. Tom noticed these small reactions and felt a small sense of quiet satisfaction. People were beginning to question her authority. As the afternoon approached, Martha moved to check on the refreshments, arranging plates, and adjusting decorations. Tom remained behind, near the dam. The water waited quietly, reflecting the sunlight, calm and powerful. He could hear the sounds of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft music drifting in the wind. Susan returned once more, standing silently at his side. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. You could stop it, and she would still be upset, but at least no one would get too shocked. Tom shook his head. "I am not trying to harm anyone. I am only reminding her that nature follows its own rules. The water is patient. I am patient too. When the time comes, it will flow as it must. He watched Martha laugh with her friends, unaware of the tension building just across the street. Everything seemed calm, perfect even. But Tom knew that calm was temporary. Nature, like fairness, always found a way. The sun was high in the sky, warming the neighborhood, when Tom made his way to the dam. He had spent the morning observing Martha's garden party from a distance. She moved among her guests, laughing and showing off her decorations, completely unaware of the calm power waiting just across the street. Tom stopped at the edge of the dam, placing his hand on the iron lever. It felt cold and firm under his fingers. He had never used it before, but he knew exactly what it could do. The pond behind him shimmered like liquid silver, calm and wide, but full of energy. The water had waited years, quietly held by the old stones. Now it was ready to move. For a long moment, Tom simply held the lever, thinking. This was not about revenge. It was about balance. Martha had tried to punish him for owning what was rightfully his, for something that belonged naturally to the land. He had tried to ignore her letters, the fines, and the public shame she hoped to cast, but her garden party had been the final demonstration of her control. He pushed the lever slowly. The iron groaned, resisting at first, but then shifted. Water began to trickle from the pond into the ditch that ran toward the street. At first, it was gentle, almost playful, a soft stream moving with purpose. Tom watched quietly, the wind lifting his hair, the sounds of the party drifting faintly across the road. As the minutes passed, the trickle grew stronger. The water rushed down the narrow ditch, gaining momentum. It moved fast, eager to find its path. Tom stayed calm, letting nature do what it always had. He did not shout, did not laugh, only observed. Meanwhile, Martha was calling her guests for a toast. Glasses were lifted, smiles bright. To a perfect day, she said, her voice ringing across the yard. Her friends clapped, unaware that the calm they enjoyed was about to be broken. The water reached the first low point in the yard. It spread quickly, rolling over the grass, soaking the edges of the tables. Guests screamed in surprise as their shoes sank into the wet ground. Martha turned, her eyes widening in shock. The water had arrived, moving faster and faster, ignoring her carefully arranged flowers and decorations. Tom remained on the dam, watching quietly as the pond released its energy. Chairs tipped, tablecloths lifted with the current, and some of the lighter food floated across the yard. The children shrieked with a mixture of fear and excitement, running to higher ground. The adults scrambled to save drinks, gifts, and plates of food. Martha's face turned red as she tried to maintain control, shouting at her guests to move away. Her voice was lost in the rush of water. She ran from table to table, dragging chairs and decorations, but the water moved too quickly. The perfect image she had worked for all morning was gone within minutes. Tom stayed calm, knowing he had not caused this intentionally. The water was simply following its natural path. He felt a strange satisfaction not from seeing Martha embarrassed, but from watching the truth of nature remind everyone that it could not be controlled by human rules. The guests stood on dry spots, looking at the flooding yard in shock. Some laughed nervously, others helped clean up, and a few simply stared. Martha, soaked and frustrated, tried to yell, but even her sharpest words were drowned by the rushing water. Finally, Tom released the lever completely. The pond level lowered slightly, but the water kept flowing smoothly through the ditch, ensuring the garden party would never return to the careful perfection Martha had arranged. Susan, who had watched from a safe distance, came running toward Tom. "You did it," she said softly, shaking her head. "You didn't even touch anyone, but she has no idea what hit her." Tom nodded. "I didn't want to harm anyone. I just reminded her that water follows its own rules. It cannot be owned like a possession. That is all." He looked back at the yard across the street. Martha was standing in the middle of the mess, dripping wet, trying to maintain some authority while guests helped each other recover. The laughter and chatter were now tinged with disbelief. The powerful display of water had humbled her without anyone being hurt. Tom walked slowly back to his house. The pond behind him was lower, but still strong, still calm. The dam had done its job. He sat on his porch, looking at the water. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace. He had defended what was his, not with anger or violence, but with patience and the power of nature itself. The morning after the garden party, the neighborhood was buzzing. People whispered as they walked down the street, some shaking their heads, others chuckling quietly. The sight of Martha's garden, still soaked and scattered with toppled chairs and floating tablecloths, had become the talk of the town. Tom stepped outside to inspect his property. The pond was calm again, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. The dam had released enough water to remind Martha of its power, but it had not caused any real damage beyond her garden. The grass near the ditch was wet, but nothing had been ruined permanently. For Tom, the natural balance had been restored. Across the street, Martha stomped around her yard, trying to salvage what she could. Her dress was wet, her hair damp and messy. Her face was red with frustration. A few neighbors stopped to watch, some offering weak smiles of sympathy, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Tom saw Susan coming down the road. She carried a small towel and a bottle of water. "Morning, Tom," she said softly, her eyes flicking toward Martha. "I just wanted to check on you. Are you okay after yesterday?" Tom nodded. "I'm fine, Susan. The pond is fine. Everything is fine." That was all it needed to remind everyone of the truth. Susan hesitated. "You could have done it differently, but somehow you didn't hurt anyone. It's clever, really. The water just followed its natural path." Tom smiled slightly. "It doesn't need cleverness. It just needed patience. Nature always does what it must." Meanwhile, Martha was on her phone, calling the HOA board. Her voice was sharp, filled with frustration and disbelief. She described the damage, insisting Tom had acted intentionally. A few minutes later, she noticed Tom and Susan talking across the street. She raised her voice, but it barely carried over the soft hum of the morning. Tom didn't respond. He simply continued his walk along the edge of the pond, checking the levees and the dam. Everything was in order. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Martha's frantic movements across the street. A few neighbors came by to talk to Tom. Some apologized for supporting Martha, some laughed quietly about the garden party disaster, and others simply shook their heads in disbelief. They all seemed relieved that Tom had remained calm and that no one had been harmed. "Tom," said one neighbor named Ben, "I have to admit, I didn't think anyone would stand up to Martha like that. You handled it perfectly. Calm, quiet, and smart." Tom shrugged. "I didn't want to fight anyone. I just wanted things to be fair. The pond is mine by right, and I will not be bullied over it." By late morning, Martha had begun to recover, though her pride had been damaged. She called a few of her friends, trying to explain what had happened, but her explanations fell flat. Many guests from the party had already shared stories of the flood, emphasizing that it was water moving naturally, not an act of malice. Tom watched quietly from his porch. He felt no anger or satisfaction in Martha's frustration. Instead, he felt peace. He had stood up for what was his without harming anyone. The neighborhood had seen the power of fairness and patience. Susan stayed with him for a while, chatting about small neighborhood matters. She commented on the flowers blooming near his pond and the way the ducks had returned to the calm water. It was a simple conversation, but it reminded Tom that life went on, even after conflict. Later in the day, Martha came over to Tom's property, splashing slightly in the wet grass. She stopped at the edge of the pond, glaring. "This isn't over, Tom," she said. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. The HOA will act again." Tom looked at her calmly. "I did nothing to humiliate you. The water did what it always does. You tried to control something that cannot be controlled. That is all. If the HOA has a problem with fairness, they will see it themselves." Martha shook her head and left, still fuming. Tom returned to his porch and sat down. The pond rippled gently in the evening breeze, peaceful and quiet once again. For the first time in weeks, he felt that his life had returned to balance. The neighborhood began to change subtly after that day. People no longer feared Martha as much. Conversations at the local stores and sidewalks included quiet smiles and nods toward Tom. They admired the way he had handled the situation, not with anger or violence, but with patience, calm, and respect for the natural order of things. As the sun set, Tom sipped his tea on the porch, watching the pond glow under the fading light. Nature had a way of teaching lessons without words, without punishment, and without harm. He had learned that lesson, and now, so had the neighborhood. The morning after the garden party disaster, the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual. The events of the previous day had left everyone talking, but the initial shock had begun to settle. Tom walked along the edge of his pond, enjoying the calm water. Ducks floated lazily on the surface, and the reflection of the morning sun made the pond look like glass. The dam had done its job, and the lesson had been delivered without anyone being hurt. Word spread quickly. Neighbors stopped by Tom's property, not to complain, but to express relief and admiration. Many had witnessed Martha's chaos from a distance, and they were impressed by how Tom had stayed calm and in control. Some even apologized quietly for ever supporting her strict rules. "Tom," said Ben, walking up with a small basket of fresh bread, "I just wanted to say that you handled everything so well. You didn't need to fight or argue. You just let things happen naturally. It was clever and fair." Tom smiled. "Thank you, Ben. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to make sure fairness was respected. The pond belongs to the land, and that should be enough for everyone to understand." Susan appeared again, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. "People are talking about you, Tom," she said quietly. "Not just about the pond, but about how you handled Martha's party. Everyone is starting to see that patience and calmness are stronger than anger or control." Tom accepted the flowers. "I hope it helps people remember that balance is important. Nature follows its own rules, and so should we." Across the street, Martha's house was still a little messy. Some chairs had been reset, but the ground remained damp in patches. She moved through her garden with a frown, trying to re-establish order, but the pride she had lost was not so easily recovered. Her voice was quieter now, and fewer neighbors joined her as they had during the party. Tom watched from his porch. He did not feel triumph or satisfaction from Martha's frustration. He felt peace. The neighborhood had learned a lesson, and he had defended what was right without causing harm. That was all he wanted. Later in the day, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Several neighbors attended to discuss the events of the previous day. Tom did not go, but he watched from a distance as Martha attempted to explain her version of events. Many neighbors, however, disagreed with her. They acknowledged that the pond had existed for years and that Tom had done nothing malicious. The board listened, and it became clear that Martha had overstepped her authority. By evening, the news had spread even further. Some neighbors came to Tom's property, bringing small gifts of flowers or homemade treats. They wanted to thank him for standing up calmly and showing that fairness was more important than control. Tom greeted them politely, offering smiles and small conversations. "Tom," said a neighbor named Lily, "you've reminded us that trying to control everything doesn't make life better. Sometimes, we just need to respect nature and each other." Tom nodded. "Exactly. The pond reminds me every day that balance is natural. We can't force things to be different without consequences." Martha, meanwhile, retreated into her house. She was quiet now, and her influence over the neighborhood had diminished. People no longer feared her warnings. The flood had shown them that patience and natural order could be more powerful than rules and authority. As the sun set, Tom walked along the pond once more. The water reflected the soft colors of the evening sky. The ducks swam gently, and the sound of the wind through the trees made everything feel peaceful. He sat on the edge of the dock, letting his feet brush the cool water, and thought about the week's events. He realized that the struggle with Martha had not been about water alone. It had been about respect, fairness, and the courage to stand by what is right. He had defended his property and his peace without aggression. The pond had been his ally, not a weapon. Nature had simply reminded the neighborhood of the truth. Susan came to sit beside him. "It's finally calm," she said. "And it seems like things will stay that way. People are starting to see what really matters." Tom nodded, looking out at the water. "Yes. Peace comes when we respect each other and the world around us. That is the lesson everyone needed to see." The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Martha remained a neighbor, but her power was diminished. She no longer controlled conversations or events. People greeted Tom with smiles, and children played safely near the pond, no longer worried about strict rules or fines. Tom sat on the dock as the last rays of the sun disappeared. He felt a sense of quiet pride, not in defeating Martha, but in protecting what was right and natural. His pond, his land, and his peace had survived the storm, both literal and figurative. And as the stars appeared one by one in the sky, Tom knew that the calm pond would always remind him and the neighborhood of patience, fairness, and the quiet power of nature.